So let's look at this. How do you define the net foreign effect? Because you're saying it's unchanged from Q1 to Q2. What does that mean?
Well, it's not one number that I like a current account balance, but I like to look at, from our property barometer survey, estate agents' perceptions on the one hand of sellers selling in order to emigrate, their estimated percentage of total sales for that motive. And then against that to look at foreign buyers buying property in South Africa. And what we've seen in the first half of 2012 was some improvement in foreign buying. It would seem it got to a very low level of about 2% of total buying by some stage of 2010. It's now back up to 4%. That's always been a small number in South Africa, although in earlier years in the bigger volume markets it was at some stages 7 and 6%.
When was that?
Well, about 2005 it peaked at 7% at one stage and was about 6.5% again in 2008. But then it really slumped with the global slowdown, as you would expect, everybody's staying at home. And now it's just in recent times sort of ticked up a little. It's still a thinner volume market, so that 4% doesn't represent anything near what it was in the boom times, but it's still some improvement from a year and a half or so ago.
Any indication as to who's buying the homes of that, as you say, 3% of total buying foreigners? Which foreigners are buying South African homes?
Well, we don't split up too much, but the one thing we do in the survey is we ask them for the perception of how many of these buyers are from the African continent. And that's risen quite significantly to about 20%. And I think what we're going to see, we don't have a long enough history of that to see what it was a good few years ago. But I think if you look at Africa's growth prospects, it's a lot more politically stable, and the wealth generated in Africa must be growing quite significantly. So I think that and more and more business links with a growing African continent, I think will lead to African foreign buyers being a lot more significant than 20%. That's 20% of total foreign buyers. Yeah. I think at some stage in the years to come, they may well be the majority.
That is fascinating. 20% of all foreigners who own homes here are African. And as you say, I mean,
who are buying, not own, but who
are buying homes. Yeah, the latest
the foreigners. Yeah,
the latest are buying. Let's look at the immigration trends, because 3.8% of total sellers in Q2 were immigrating. Is that high by any standards, or is that what's the trend in that number?
Well, it's still for me probably 3.8% too much, but I mean it's been a very relatively stable at round about near to 4% of total sellers for the last year and a half or so. Now, take it back to 2008, where at one stage it was up near 20%. Admittedly, that was a thinner market, but still, that was a concerning number. There was some political turbulence, I remember, at the time, and there was the Eskom crisis, and people thought the lights were going to be switched off. There were various factors playing a role, but that was a really bad time from an immigration selling point of view. You don't want to see that. And that's, I guess, one of the advantages of a slower world economy. Yes, our exports suffer a bit, but if you want to fix certain aspects of an economy, the skills are more freely available at times like this. They aren't all running away to Dubai and to London and so on at a fast pace.
We saw that report coming through from AdCorp yesterday when it comes to job losses. And you know, AdCorp has a lot to say around skills and the need to retain skills. So that, of course, would be a positive signal in terms of less people immigrating, retaining the necessary skills to boost our economy.
Yeah, but I think, the parts of the economy that need fixing, be it in some parastatals that have skills shortages, whatever, I think the authorities need to see the opportunity to fix now while the global economy is weak, because these numbers can rise significantly once there's great opportunities all over the world and the world economy is booming. Developing countries do have brain drain problems, so you can fix some important areas of the economy in these down times.
How attractive is the South African property market to international buyers? I mean, how would South African property stack up if someone was looking to invest in property as opposed to buying it as a home? What is the relative attractiveness?
Well, I think traditionally,
and I suppose that's a very subjective question that I'm throwing at you, but any views on that?
It is, it's a tough one at the moment, because some of those developed world property markets have really tanked. So they may offer better value at the moment than ours, which has remained fairly stable. But what I can say is that traditionally we've had low levels of foreign buying. And a lot of that has to do with, I guess, our geographic isolation from the big economies of the world. We're one of the most isolated economies on the planet. With Africa looking like its prospects are improving, that may change, and that's a lot of your foreign buying in big centres of the world comes through people who work there. It's not holiday makers or the likes. It's people who are physically employed there. As we have more foreigners doing business with South Africa, and hopefully more foreign skills being employed here, because I think we need them. So you would expect over time more an increase in foreign buying and ownership. At the moment, though, I would say it's relatively low. A city like London, for instance, I mean, my guess is that the numbers there must be far higher than someplace like Johannesburg.
Interesting. Also, a lot of Middle Eastern buyers buying into the London property market, and that's seen as one of the reasons that you've seen an increase in property values there, which is an interesting trend. In terms of the property market right now, property prices, because the latest survey, I think it was unchanged, and we were starting to see momentum falling back, month on month, prices coming back. Is this a concern for you, just looking at it from a macro point of view?
It's not too much of a concern. I would expect now, after that big boom, the big property cycle is 15 to 20 years in length. So after the big boom, you expect a mediocre performance in the market for a good few years, and so it's more or less what I would expect. My big concern is more, that one could get a significant price decline, a price slump, negative growth, whatever you want to call it, should the world economy really tank. I think there's a lot of risks in the world economy at the moment. Europe's not the only one. I think the US also needs to realize that with its high debt levels, it's at risk. So there are a lot of risks, and obviously if those risks manifest themselves in a prolonged global recession, for instance, you would see a very significant, I think, price decline in our market. Don't know whether my concern's more with the economy or with the housing market, but both. But our housing market would suffer under those circumstances.
Yeah, and so much uncertainty right now. It's very hard to tell, how this European situation is going to pan out and for how long. Thank you so much.
Pleasure.
For joining us today. John Loos, household and property sector strategist at FNB.